All right, I hope you can all see this on your screens. Yeah, right. So, hello everyone. My name is Nathaniel Thomas Hall. I thank you all for being with me today on today's webinar. Looks like we've got around 100 people so far. I'm just checking you guys can hear me. Yep, can you hear me? I'm seeing some thumbs up. Fantastic. Great. Yeah, looks like we've got about 100 people in here today, which is fantastic. Thank you all for signing up. And I'm sure there'll be some questions as we go through this presentation. So please do make use of the Q&A button at the top of your screens. I'll be going through as many as we have time for at the end of the session. So yeah, please feel free to use this as an interactive session and drop any questions in there that you might want answered. I'm really proud to announce this is the first of a new series of webinars that we should be hosting as a business. I will be covering a range of subject matters relating to emergency and preparedness. And in today's session in particular, we'll be reviewing disasters, how they've occurred, and the means for them driving change, in addition to what more can be done to create safer environments for us all. So before I get into that, I'd like to just take a minute or two just to present to you a little bit about who we are and why we're so passionate about this matter. So as a business, our core values have been infused with desire to help those who need help the most. Since our very inception over 40 years ago, the Evac+Chair brand has signified innovation, customer-focused solutions, and the finest UK manufactured products. With international accreditation to both ISO 9001 and 13485, quality has been at the very pinnacle and forefront of everything we do. Today, we are known as the manufacturers of the world's first and most widely used and recognized evacuation chairs. This is great, but does not by no stretch of the imagination indicate that our job is done. I've personally witnessed loved ones and friends become affected by mobility issues over my years, as many of us I'm sure have. And upon reflection, it's left me with a feeling of worry and guilt when realizing I've been unable to adequately protect them from danger at work or potentially in public spaces. Dangers and hazards, however, face us every single day. But I do feel many of us have become a bit blasé, potentially, or just we start to take mitigation of these risks a little bit for granted. The old adage, no one ever thinks will happen to them, rings as true today as it ever did. And we've seen several disasters in recent times which have highlighted the need for evacuation chairs in public spaces. The most recent of these publicized disasters includes the Swiss bar fire at Le Constellation Bar in Switzerland. The blaze here broke out in the early hours of January 1st as revelers celebrated bringing in the new year. Celebration quickly turned into horror as the internal pyrotechnics ignited flammable foam within the building, killing a total of 41 people and injuring 115 others. This incident raised questions about the effectiveness of the venue's emergency planning and evacuation arrangements, particularly given the rapid spread of fire and a huge number of casualties. This general lack of practical and holistic planning is unfortunately more widespread than we would hope. Often it's the most vulnerable members of society who are hit hardest when preparation is neglected. We saw this also publicized in the news recently, where student and wheelchair user Lucas Veza O'Brien was left unable to evacuate from his classroom when an electrical fire broke out at his school. Lucas was forced to watch on as staff members and his fellow students alighted from the building while he was left trapped by stairs. In the wake of this incident, he's gone on to launch the No Student Left Behind campaign. This initiative raised public awareness to the dangers of many of his peers and himself are still facing in a learning environment. It also caused evacuation chairs to be installed across all multi-level schools. This highlights the current gap where the lives of our most vulnerable are concerned. Those with permanent mobility impairments often end up paying the highest price for negligent or inadequate safety planning. The New Grange care home fire provides yet another example of how vulnerable groups can be disproportionately affected. Yet another electrical fault here triggered a fire which rapidly spread due to failures in compartmentation and the absence of sprinkler protection. Unfortunately here, 2 residents, Ivy Spriggs and Daphne Holloway, sadly lost their lives. The subsequent investigation resulted in substantial fines and highlighted shortcomings in the fire safety management. What makes this case particularly important is that elderly residents often have limited mobility and are heavily dependent on staff assistance. When evacuation systems fail, they have fewer options available to them. This can leave elderly and disabled people feeling overlooked and underprotected. Tragically, at the very same time, they represent the sectors of society who are in fact overrepresented in the casualty toll of such disasters, as Grenfell also showed us. The continued risk posed by buildings similar to Grenfell Tower are not only based on their construction, but also their policies. One policy that has received continued scrutiny in the wake of Grenfell has been the stay put policy. Stay put depends on multiple fire safety systems working correctly. At Grenfell, those systems failed. Once again, those who disproportionately paid the price for those failures were the mobility impaired. In fact, approximately 21% of the 72 people who died from this disaster had a mobility impairment. This number equates to 40% of the mobility impaired individuals who lived in Grenfell Tower. As a result, the incident fundamentally changed assumptions around evacuation planning in high-rise buildings. However, nearly a decade later, many of the concerns raised after the Grenfell tragedy remain relevant. Stay put remains the default strategy used in many residential high-rise buildings. At the same time, thousands of mobility impaired individuals continue to live in those environments. Fire safety professionals, campaign groups, disability advocates have all repeatedly argued that relying solely on stay put puts too many people without clear means of escape. This question is no longer whether the risk exists, it's now whether enough is being done to address it. Well, last year we saw beginnings of a change to address some of these risks with the enactment of the Fire Safety Regulation 2025. This details the formation of new guidance for residential facility owners, landlords, and responsible persons, and aims to formalize identification and planning for those who may require assistance evacuating their homes in an emergency. Rather than assuming people can evacuate independently, organizations are now expected to actively plan for those who cannot. Planning is conducted through the structure of a residential PEEP, or Personal Emergency Evacuation Plan. The process begins with a person-centered fire risk assessment, which evaluates an individual's circumstances to determine what support may be required. These came into force in April 2026 and must now be shared with local authority and fire and rescue authorities once completed. Now, we've covered a few examples here of fire. However, there are many other reasons that may call for the emergency movement of individuals from at-risk areas within a building. This includes, but is not exclusive to, medical disasters, electrical disasters, natural disasters, chemical disasters, and with armed conflict and civil unrest affecting many global communities. Terrorism, unfortunately, continues to be one of the most potent risks facing us all. We have seen cases just this year which have highlighted inter-community tensions and increased terrorist activity within the UK. This can be witnessed in the data. Counter-terrorism policing stats show a staggering 248 arrests were made in 2025 related to anti-terrorist operations. Many of these arrests were made just in the nick of time to prevent catastrophe, with 43 late-stage attacks disrupted. Even with this being the case, 16 terror attacks have taken place on UK soil since 2017, with 2017 itself seeing one of the largest terrorist attacks in recent UK history, with the Manchester Arena bombings. This bombing claimed the lives of 22 people, including Martin Hett, who the legislation of Martin's Law has been named in honour of. Martin's mother, Figan Murray, tirelessly campaigned for enhancing public safety following this tragedy. The purpose of Martin's Law is straightforward: to ensure publicly accessible venues are prepared for terrorist incidents. This law now places greater responsibility on organisations to assess risks, train staff, and establish clear emergency procedures. Preparedness is becoming a legal expectation rather than simply good practice. So, what is Martin's Law? Well, it stipulates that public venues must adopt a proportionate approach to keeping their visitors safe from attacks and provide adequate plans for egress. Martin's Law is then divided into two groups or tiers. Tier 1, otherwise known as standard tier, applies to all establishments that hold between 200 and 799 people. Tier 2, or the enhanced tier, applies to establishments that hold more than 799 individuals. Now, there are exceptions to this grouping, with large schools and places of worship, for example, being eligible for standard tier status. However, generally speaking, larger venues face more extensive obligations, while smaller premises are expected to implement more basic preparedness measures. The key message here is that regardless of size, every organisation has a responsibility to consider how will people be protected and evacuated during an emergency. The legislation becomes enforceable from April 2027, and non-compliant businesses will face enforcement by the SIA. They, in turn, have the power to issue formal compliance and restriction notices to negligent establishments. The consequences of poor preparation, however, extend far beyond regulatory penalties. There can be reputational damage, legal action, Equality Act implications, and in the most severe cases, criminal liability, as we're seeing now with Grenfell. But perhaps the most important consideration is the human cost. Many disasters demonstrate that failures rarely stem from one single issue. They occur when multiple weaknesses align. Emergency planning should never be viewed as a tick box exercise. It's about protecting lives. When we look at major incidences, more than often, it's a series of failures across multiple systems, processes, and controls that lead to disaster. This stems from the fact that many fire safety measures are designed to work together. Fire doors, compartmentation, alarm systems, maintenance programs, staff procedures, evacuation plans, all form part of the same system. The challenge is, if one element fails, it can place greater pressure on the others. And if multiple failures occur at the same time, the consequences can be severe. The stats on this slide help illustrate this point. In 2024-2025, nearly 3,000 formal notices were issued following unsatisfactory fire safety audits, while 34 organisations were prosecuted under the fire safety legislation. At the time, fire door inspections found that 75% failed to meet the required standard. 75%. The message here is simple. Compliance cannot be assumed. Organisations need to regularly review their fire safety arrangements and ask themselves an important question. If one of our control measures fails, do we have safe and effective ways and means to protect everyone in this building? So when looking at our current landscape, we have several trends that are converging at the same time. We have an aging population. We have more inclusive employment practices and a growing awareness around equality and accessibility. As a result, the requirement for inclusive evacuation planning is becoming increasingly significant. Organizations that act early will be better prepared than those waiting for legislation or enforcement to force change. Part of the requirement for a proactive approach originates from our rapidly changing demographic and landscape. The UK has a growing disabled workforce. People are working later in life. And perhaps most importantly, many disabilities are not visible. This means that emergency planning cannot focus solely on obvious mobility impairments. Organizations need systems that support a wide range of needs, including temporary injuries, hidden disabilities, and age-related mobility challenges. The number of people requiring assistance is increasing, not decreasing. When people often think of mobility impairment, they tend to think of wheelchair users, when in reality, mobility challenges affect a much broader group. Individuals recovering from surgery, living with chronic pain, respiratory conditions, heart conditions, neurological disorders may all struggle during emergency evacuation. Inclusive planning begins by recognizing that not every need is immediately visible. Now, over recent decades, we've made significant progress in accessibility. We've improved prevalence of entrances with access ramps, lifts, parking, disabled parking potentially, and other accessibility faculties or facilities. But accessibility shouldn't stop when someone enters a building. We must also consider how they leave it during an emergency. Access and egress, in my opinion, should be viewed as two sides of the same coin. Because if someone cannot safely evacuate, true accessibility has not been achieved. So, what does effective inclusive evacuation actually look like? Well, it starts with identifying risks. It then continues with planning, training, and regular review. And where stairway evacuation may be required, it often involves having the right equipment available and staff who know how to use it confidently. Preparedness is not one solution. It's a combination of people, procedures, and equipment all working together. So we've looked at the risks, the legislation, and the growing responsibility organizations have to protect everyone during an emergency. The next question is, how do you actually achieve that? Well, at Evac+Chair, we spent the last 4 decades developing evacuation solutions that enable people with reduced mobility to move safely down stairways when lifts cannot be used. Every building is different, which means there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. The layout of a building, the staircase design, the evacuation routes, and the needs of those who may require assistance all play a part in determining the most suitable equipment. That's why we personally offer the complimentary site survey. It helps organizations to identify potential risks, assess their evacuation requirements, and ensure they have the right solution in place for their building and for their occupants. Ultimately, inclusive evacuation isn't just about having equipment available, it's about having the right equipment in the right place when it's needed most. And of course, having the right equipment is only part of the solution, which brings us on to aftercare in the form of training and maintenance. Having the right evacuation equipment in place is a crucial first step, but it's only effective if people know how to use it when an emergency occurs. In a high pressure situation, staff need to be able to act quickly and confidently and safely. Training helps to ensure operators can use this equipment correctly. while remaining calm under pressure and providing reassurance to the person being evacuated. Maintenance is equally as important. Evacuation equipment may spend years waiting for the moment when it's needed. But when that moment comes, it has to perform exactly as intended. In fact, under Article 17 of the Regulatory Reform Order, the RRO, the responsible person must ensure fire safety equipment is properly maintained and remains in efficient working order. That means regular servicing by a competent professional and in strict accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. Ultimately, effective evacuation planning relies on three things working together: the right equipment, properly trained people, and equipment that is maintained and ready for use. Because when an emergency happens, reliability isn't optional. Takeaways. So, if there's one message I'd like to leave everyone with today, it's this: tragedy should not be the trigger for action. The disasters we've discussed expose weaknesses in planning, legislation, and preparedness. However, they should also highlight to you just how often people with reduced mobility are placed at greater risk. Today, expectations are changing. Legislation is evolving. Organizations are increasingly expected to anticipate risk rather than react to it. The goal is simple: protect everyone, always. Well, I thank you all for giving me your time and for joining me on today's webinar. I hope the session has provided useful insight into how recent events are shaping the future of inclusive evacuation planning. If you'd like further information about evacuation planning, training, legislation, or equipment solutions, please feel free to contact us after the session. If you have any questions, I'll be delighted to answer them now, so please place them in the Q&A chat box at the top of your screen. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look in Q&A and see what questions we've had. So we have one here from Paul Holroyd. Hi, Paul. Thank you for the question. The question is, are chairs of 10 years of age or more being classed as obsolete? And the short answer to that, Paul, is no. We've recently launched, however, our lifetime assurance package, a lifetime care package, which means chairs after 10 years can be supported as part of our lifetime package. So that takes from 10 to 15 years, and it's something that I'll be more than happy to get some information out to you about, Paul, to help you look at your options. A lot can change in 10 years, and we've brought out quite a few new chairs in that time that are better suited to some different environments and staircases we're seeing. So it could be worth going back and doing that complimentary site survey I spoke about earlier in my presentation, just to make sure that you're still using the correct chair for the correct environment. So please get in touch, Paul, so we can come back and potentially arrange that for you. We have another question here from Damien Hope. Hi, Damien. Where do colleges sit within these tiers? That's a great question. Great question. So if I have a look at the comments here, I think this is something that is often asked by many people because of the exceptions that can be within some of the tiers here within Martin's Law. So further education, it does remain within the standard tier, even if the amount of individuals does go over the threshold and would typically be enhanced. And that is one of the exceptions that has been made as part of Martin's Law. Let's have a look here and see if we have any more questions. So we have a question here from Ola. Hi, Ola. Thanks for the question. Do residential PEEPs apply to all of the UK? The answer is that this is an English, it's an English law. Whether that's going to roll out to the whole of the UK is something that I think we have to look into. But definitely within England, it's going to be enforced from 2027. Sorry, residential PEEPs, sorry, excuse me, that is actually from this year, 2026, April. Are Evac chairs difficult to use? Do you offer an alternative solution such as evacuation mattresses? That is from WATC Buildings. Thanks for your question. Yes, we offer our rescue mat, which is another potential solution where chairs just for whatever reason aren't the primary solution or the best or most efficient solution. So we can send you some information through about our rescue mat for you to have a look at in those types of situations. Thank you for the question. Bridget Litchfield has asked, how often should staff have refresher training in using the chairs? This is a great question. So our recommendation would be that every time you're doing a fire drill, which should at least be every 6 months, that they should be using the chair as part of that drill where possible. But I would also suggest, even earlier than that, we would state that 3 months should be around the time at the very limit of when you should be training with your chairs, just to make sure that the staff who have been trained on the chairs remain confident and competent. Where you have people that have particular PEEPs and uses for chairs as well, I would really encourage getting them involved in that training internally. And if that's something you'd like us to help you arrange, please get in contact and we can definitely help with getting your training course with our team of trainers who are all around the UK. Let's see if we have any more questions here, guys. Okay, Rosie has written, is there guidance for chairs based on the construction of staircase, e.g. metal, outdoors, vinyl versus carpet? Yeah, great question. There is. So we operate with a number of matrices internally that give us really good direction as to what chairs need to be used where. There are quite a few variables because these aren't the only ones. The construction of the staircase, there's also the angle of the staircase, there's also the width of the staircase. So there's a number of variables that go into a decision that is made around what chair is the best chair for your particular environment. This, of course, can be helped through our Evac Expert, which is on our website. So if you ever want any guidance on what chair is best for your particular environment, I would suggest that that's the first port of call you could go to at least check that the chair you're looking at is correct for your environment. But other than that, please feel free to call us. We can send someone out and kind of go through, the best chairs for your situation. Graham Hart, thank you for the question, Graham. It states, hi Nathaniel, what can we do for high-rise residential blocks of flats with no trained staff on site? Yeah, great question. This, I think, Graham, is where the residential PEEPs is supposed to come in and help give you some guidance. And we have also written some guidance in relation to that on our website. So it's definitely going to be something that we can help you through. And I would say the best approach to start with is to understand the demographic of your building, but also understand kind of best practice as well. And what I would say is being prepared and having evacuation equipment accessible, having people who are trained on site where possible, and if not, empowering those individuals who need to use the chairs, with training, is going to be your best approach. But this is something, Graham, that I think on an individual building by building basis, we can help you with and make sure that also lines up and correlates with the recent advice in the residential PEEPs documentation. And I think that is all of the questions I have from you guys. Yeah, that's all the questions. Thank you all for your questions. For the questions I answered, if you have follow-up questions about anything that I've said here, please do get into contact and get in touch so we can help you work through this together. And thank you all for giving me your time today. It's been really, really enjoyable. And I look forward to seeing you all, hopefully on future webinars or in person potentially at one of our many exhibitions throughout the year. Thank you all, and speak to you all soon, hopefully. Goodbye.